Good morning, everyone. This is session 2 of day 2, and our topic for today of the colloquium is healthy living. And so our first presenter this morning talked about vitamin D and how that relates to our sleep patterns. And now our current presenter, Jennifer Palanci, she's going to present on other areas of health that aren't physical, but that can be emotional and relationship related. And so she's collected a bunch of research and information on this topic and actually has published a manuscript on it, which she can probably share at the end of this for anyone who wants to read the full document. But Jennifer, I'll just turn it over to you and let you begin.
All right, well, thank you. And this is an honor to be here. My presentation is featuring my book titled Healthy Boundaries, Relationship Model, How to Avoid Emotional Affairs and Third-Party Intruders. And so before I continue, I would just like to say to the viewers that I do have a lot to share. And also I have a tendency to speak very fast. So I'll try to keep that at a good pace. And I promise you at the end, there will be time for your questions. All right. So just a little bit about myself. I've been a nurse since 1984. I later became a licensed massage therapist and worked with hospice patients for a good number of years. I'm board certified in medical surgical nursing. And then I very gratefully finished my bachelor's of science in nursing last year at Aspen University. And that was very exciting. I read every morning, and in my adult life, I always read something that is related to psychology or philosophy or spirituality, or something that's very motivationally uplifting. And also in my free time, I love gardening, and I spend a large amount of time in my yard. The relevance of this topic is in reference to my personal experience, where a third party was introduced as a friend only. And so while I was going through this experience, I was also studying the nursing models at Aspen. And so I then came up with this idea of a relationship model. The objectives for today is to understand the concept and the benefits of boundaries, what the emotional affair looks like, and the dynamics of the emotional affair. And then we'll conclude with the healthy boundaries model. All right, so the thing to keep in mind is that it's important to understand this topic because emotional affairs are not widely acknowledged compared to sexual affairs. And when I first began my research, there appeared to be limited information. I'm beginning to see more current articles online today. Also, these relationships are hard to identify. And it's also good to be aware of this whole emotional affair issue because these situations can be just as damaging as a sexual affair. So I'd like you to take note of my key words. Loved one, spouse, or the marital committed relationship refers to any loving committed relationship between two adult people. So whether you're married or you're living together or you're in this exclusive dating, loving, committed relationship, okay? All right, so here are the participants of the relationship triangle, the participating spouse, the hurting spouse, and then the third party person. All right, so my research and my discussion today is specifically focused on the emotional boundary within the marital relationship. There are many boundaries within every relationship, but today and in my research, the focus is on emotional boundaries. And so while I was doing my research, my question was, why do these relationships occur? Why is this a concern to worry about it? And why is this considered unfaithful? And why it then is unfair to all three members of the relationship triangle? My hypothesis is that a third-party relationship can violate the emotional boundary of the marital committed relationship and then ultimately cause imbalances and confusion and some questions of trust. So I underlined the word can because not all relationships become this way. It's normal to have a good list of friends. It's very healthy to have friends outside of your marriage. And so with that in mind, we can welcome these good, healthy friendships for all of the great things that they bring to our life and bless them. All right, so when these friendships become overly involved, when they become off balance, then that is the focus of my discussion today, okay? Number 2 is that anyone can fall into these situations just because of vulnerability. And then number 3, that all 3 parties of the relationship triangle end up with an incomplete relationship. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so my sample study was basically my personal experience, and from my inside perspective, I took my experience very seriously, and I wanted to understand it not only emotionally, but most especially cognitively. And so then from there began my research. Okay. All right, this is a non-empirical study, which includes personal experience, as I just said, observation of behavior, a lot of interviews with friends and family and colleagues, a lot of research with articles and books. And I really like writing from the non-empirical perspective because it pulls in a wide range of concepts into one discussion like today. I also like the non-empirical perspective because it delivers such great food for thought for further studies. And I think that this topic would be a great qualitative study. All right, so the statistical information on this topic seems to be more focused on sexual affairs and divorce rate and things like that. So in this one report from 2020, I found a small section that addressed the concept of emotional affairs. And so when they asked their panel members, how would you feel if your partner had an emotional affair? And the majority of these people said that they would be uncomfortable without even really receiving a definition of what an emotional affair is. Now, I also did some research on open marriage couples, and they have different rules and guidelines that they will agree on independently from other couples. But the one rule across the board with all of them is that they would agree to not become emotionally involved with their extramarital partner. And so I think the key word here is emotional. And so if you think about your own emotions and your own feelings and how important they are to you and how they carry you through the day, every day. And that when you feel great, it's so wonderful. And when you feel bad, it can be completely horrible. And so, think to yourself this question: how would you feel if your loved one had feelings for someone else? Okay. All right. So what is a boundary? There are many boundaries in your various relationships, and they will change from one relationship to the next or from one setting to the next. So, for example, if it's a friendship or a family or even professionally, there's different boundaries. I really like this picture of the fence here, and this fence is obviously a very defining boundary. And so while we're looking at this picture, I'm going to talk about my relationship with my yard. I love my yard. I spend huge amounts of time in my yard, and I love beautifying it, and I love looking at it. And my yard is my sacred space, okay? So my yard depends on me to take care of it. And because I have claimed ownership of it, it's my responsibility to take care of it. And so in my yard, I do have a fence around my yard. This is my sacred space. It's where I find peace and comfort, and I don't want intruders coming into my sacred space, okay? And so how this applies to relationships is very much the same way in your committed relationship. All right, so here is the happy couple. Here is the emotional boundary around their relationship, and the whole issue of the emotional boundary is it's not tangible like the fence, but it's conceptualized. Okay, and so inside the boundary is this beautiful relationship. This is their emotional space that they share with each other. This is their sacred space, a lot like my yard is my sacred space. Okay, so in this sacred space here for the happy couple is everything that they share together, from their greatest joys to their deepest frustrations and anger, to intimacy, conversations, activities, fun, joy. This is everything that they share, and this belongs to both of them. It's theirs, and it's protected by this emotional boundary. Okay. Now, the other thing is that because each member in this relationship has claimed this as theirs, meaning this is my marriage, or this is my loved one, or this is my faithful, loyal, committed relationship, however you want to address it. So because they have claimed this as theirs, then each person has a responsibility to take care of this relationship and to protect it. The same that I take care of my yard and I protect it. Okay. All right. All right, so basically a boundary is just a mental guideline that you decide upon of where your limits are, is what you will and you will not accept in your life. Boundaries are used to protect these things that you love, such as your home or my yard or your loving, committed marital relationship, okay? And the thing that's important to know about boundaries is that boundaries are based on your values, okay? So the value that we're focusing on today is on the marital committed relationship, okay? And boundaries are carried out by your behavior, right? Boundaries then support trust and integrity of the relationship, and they create this beautiful umbrella of emotional safety. All right, so what happens then if the couple does not have a sense of boundaries, okay? Well, in situations like this, the guidelines may be unclear. The boundaries may become very blurry, kind of like this screen right now, it's completely blurry, or boundaries may be missing altogether. And so what happens then in situations like this is that each member from the relationship is basically operating independently from the other, all right, based on how they know themselves, based on their life experience, and based on their concept of boundaries, if they have a concept. Okay, some people have no idea what it is, all right? So for example, if your spouse happens to have a very open-ended, very free-flowing sense of boundaries when they're out there in the world, and your concept of boundaries may be a little more structured or maybe a lot more structured, all right, this right here is the beginning of the misunderstandings that gets created in the relationship in reference to this boundary topic. And so it's important then to have this discussion with your loved one, make clear exactly what your boundaries are, how do you demonstrate them in behaviors, and then this way you can both be on the same platform and then be operating more cohesively as a couple instead of separately. Okay, so the importance of having boundaries is because boundaries define who you are as an individual. It defines who you are as a couple and how you will gauge yourselves when you're together and when you're apart, okay? It's also important to be aware of the concept of boundaries because as human beings, we're all basically emotional human beings. This is the foundation of who we are. It's the foundation and the starting point of how we interact with others, okay? And so because of this, then we respond to others from our emotional base. And because this is the foundation of human nature, then most people make decisions based on their emotions instead of logic, okay? It's also important to be aware of emotional boundaries because they're not tangible like the fence. They're not physical like a sexual affair, which is very identifiable, all right? So it makes it difficult to gauge these emotional boundaries and to gauge exactly where that fine line is between a normal, healthy friendship and then this friendship that is becoming overly involved and off balance, all right? They're also sometimes difficult to identify because they are hidden in the friendship status, or it's just work, or it's my child's athletic team. I'm helping, you know, okay, there's always one of these issues. There is a difference between men and women and how they perceive this topic. 68% of men in this one article that I read indicated that they felt this would never happen to them. And then when it did happen to them, many of them reported that they were very happy in their marriage. And so they don't know why it happened. It just happened. Okay. Women are a little bit different in that generally speaking, when they are unhappy in their marriage, then they will most likely find emotional comfort with someone else. All right, and so a lot of these friendships begin with just an innocent association with each other from work or projects and things like that. So the couple here on the left, they're together and one person takes on a third person. And so then the relationship becomes a relationship of three people. And I like to look at this figure in the middle where they're holding hands and this person has their heart split down the middle. So I identify this as the participating spouse. All right, so this person is now having feelings for two different people. I love to talk about Nathaniel Branden. He is my favorite psychologist and author of all time. If you get a chance to read any of his books, I highly recommend you read all of them because they're just fabulous. All right. So in his section where he addresses the concept of boundaries, He says that when you have a good gauge of boundaries, that when you manage them well in your behavior and in your relationships and they're very respectful, that most likely this is reflective of high self-esteem. Okay, so on the flip side then, if you happen to have low self-esteem or just not poor judgment, that these areas of boundaries in your life may be lax or maybe just not working out well at all. Okay, and also then that as human beings, that when we fall short of these better standards, or we just not operating up to par, that it's very easy to rationalize our behavior with excuses. Okay, so the excuse helps to neutralize the behavior, to make it neutral or to make it somewhat acceptable, with the understanding that the behavior really was less than par or really was not great or probably was a big blunderous mistake or something like that. But he then goes on to say that because of this, that excuses are a cover for failure. Okay, now I think that's a very powerful statement, that excuses are a cover for failure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so my hypothesis number 2 was about vulnerability, and that as human beings, we all have this element of frailty in our minds and elements of being vulnerable. Some people are more vulnerable than others and maybe in different ways, but being vulnerable is part of the human experience, the same that being emotional is part of the human experience. You just can't help it. And so we are influenced so very much throughout the day through social media, or through the news, or through advertising, or from the workplace, and from our family, and then from these friends, okay, these friends that influence us. So some of these friends that know that you're in a committed relationship, and they know that you're married, and they influence you to be in a very personal relationship with them anyway. Sometimes these people are very manipulative and very deliberately manipulative, knowing that you're involved with someone else. Now, sometimes we can become, or sometimes these manipulative people have this characteristic within their personality, and they don't really even know it. Okay, so they might be interacting with you and laughing and joking and manipulating you left and right, and they don't even realize they're doing it, and you don't realize it's happening. And then all of a sudden, you become overly engaged and involved in this overly involved relationship. Okay. Now, sometimes we can become manipulated. Not because of someone else, but because of our own inabilities to say no. All right, so we may not know where our limitations are. We don't know when to put the brakes on or when to stop. And then all of a sudden you become overly involved and entangled into this situation that you had no intentions of doing. And then you're overly involved and in this convoluted, mixed up relationship with this person, just because of the inability to gauge yourself. And so if you can, make a point of living consciously through your day where you're aware of your values and aware of your behaviors that support your values, then a lot of these imbalances and becoming overextended in these manipulations can be avoided altogether. Okay. All right, so here is the loaded question. What is an emotional affair? In a nutshell, it's basically when one person from the marital committed relationship becomes emotionally over-involved with someone else outside of that committed relationship. There's a lot of emotional energy here. The participating spouse is also receiving a lot of emotional support from this third-party person. There's also most likely a high level of sexual attraction or tension, and that 50% of these emotional affairs usually become sexual affairs, all right? And so this third party person becomes the emotional anchor for that participating spouse. This is their go-to person. There is a need of this participating spouse to check in with them, see how they're doing, give them updates on where they are, what they're doing, when they can call them. There's this need to be in constant touch with them. Also, this third party person becomes their personal confidant and their personal advisor. And this is their companion and their friend, and has now become their best friend instead of their spouse. Okay, so while all of this emotional energy is going on in this friendship, it is presumably without a sexual romantic relationship. All right, so what does the emotional affair look like? It's going to start out most likely looking like a normal friendship, and it may remain a normal friendship for maybe for quite some time. But when this normal friendship begins to take on a different persona, all right, so things that you might start noticing then in the participating spouse, there will be elements of secrecy and not truly sharing the true nature of this friendship with their loved one. There may be a sense of inappropriate text messages or deleting text messages and emails and phone call log and things like that. So when these behaviors become noticeable in that participating spouse, the foundation of trust in the marriage has instantaneously been fractured, okay? Because there's secrecy, there's half-truths, there's hiding things. And so when that issue of trust then becomes made clear, this of course raises more red flags and concern for the hurting spouse. Other symptoms that you might see, a lot of communicating with this third-party person in ways that has nothing to do with work, or the community project, or the athletic team for your children's school, all hours of the day, evening, middle of the night. And another big symptom here is that there is most often, a sharing of personal problems with this third-party friend, and also a sharing of problems about your marriage. If you had an argument, then he or she might share that with the third-party person. Or if there's a concern, they will go to that third-party person for some assistance. So while the participating spouse is doing this, they are conveying this message that they are in need of emotional comfort, that they need a shoulder to lean on, okay? And so while this is going on, keep in mind then that the participating spouse has feelings for two people, all right? So their marriage and that committed relationship may still be very well intact and very beautiful and lovely. And all of those joyful experiences that he or she has with their marriage will most likely not be revealed to that third-party person, and then vice versa. Another big one is spending a lot of time alone with this third-party person without your knowledge. Gets back to that issue of secrecy and misleading. Defensiveness, denial, excuses, sharing personal pictures with each other that has nothing to do with business, you know, sentimental pictures, work picture, or sentimental pictures and personal pictures, romantic pictures and sexual pictures. It can just go on. Giving money to that third-party person, privately sharing gifts and favors that go back and forth. A big one here is repeatedly on the same committees. You know, this gives that third-party person a sense of legitimacy on why the participating spouse needs to be on this committee. It gives them their excuse to maintain this relationship with them. And also another big one here is displaced blame, where this participating spouse blames you for their choice to maintain secrecy, or they may blame you for being jealous and insecure when you know that your concerns were ethically and psychologically valid, okay? Excuses, any type of prioritizing that third-party person over and above you, and then most definitely the inability to let go of that third-party person when you ask them to do so. Now, all of these examples that I just gave you, some of them may be okay with you, some of them may not be okay with you, or maybe all of them are not okay with you. And so if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, is this really just a friend, okay? All right, so why do these emotional affairs occur? Some people may report that there is no reason, you know, it just happened for no reason. I can't really identify a reason. And so as nurses, we know that there's always a reason for everything, all right? So this reason for that person has just not been identified quite yet. The reasons for these emotional affairs will vary from one relationship to the next, depending on your life circumstances and the issues that you're working on in your marriage or your lifestyle and things like that. All right, but here's a few examples. The participating spouse may have issues of feeling frustrated or neglected, or they may have maybe just issues of feeling frustrated with themselves, that they have not really shared this with their loved one. They may have difficulty identifying their feelings to be able to communicate them well, or perhaps poor communication skills. And a big one here is also perhaps there might be this fear of confrontation. And so that with these issues here, then that third party person is not someone that they're obligated to. It's much easier to share problems with them instead of confronting the spouse. And this third party friend then becomes their sounding board. It becomes their stress relief and a way of helping them to collect their thoughts and feelings instead of confronting their spouse. There's also a big issue of rescuing this third party friend to jump in there and fix their problems. This can be very ego boosting, but sometimes it can get into unhealthy codependent behaviors and emotional addictions. If the marriage is in a very dark state, there can be some unresolved resentments and anger. And also this participating spouse may be questioning if they want to stay in the marriage or not. And so rather than having arguments and big intense discussions with their spouse, they can just talk to this third party person to help them collect their thoughts, okay? So there are many, many, many reasons why these emotional affairs can occur. And so what I would like you to keep in mind, however, about these is that every one of these examples that I just shared with you are basically excuses, okay? And as we know from Nathaniel Branden, that excuses are a cover for failure. And so the reason for that is because boundaries, if you remember, are upheld by behavior, okay? So this participating spouse then did not maintain behavior to uphold his or her boundaries. In any one of those scenarios that I just gave you, those various reasons, and each one of those reasons, there are always many options on why that participating spouse could have chosen something different besides going to someone else. So for example, if someone has poor communication skills or they have fear of confrontation, there are plenty of methods out there in the world to learn quality communication so that they can maintain this quality level of communicating with their loved one. There are plenty of therapists out there that can help them overcome their fears, to work with that person, or even to work together as a couple. So there's always many options for staying within that emotional boundary and within the relationship to address these issues, besides running to someone else and avoiding them in the marriage. So basically, very simply stated, the participating spouse failed to uphold boundaries through his or her behavior. It's a harsh reality, but that's truly the way it is. And they also failed to maintain focus and value on the marriage and or their loved one, all right? Okay, so why is this a concern? Well, I think this picture pretty much explains it all. That beautiful, emotional, free-flowing, loving space for the happy couple is now becoming congested and very convoluted and kind of mixed up here. And so when the participating spouse is sharing private information about the marriage to this third-party person, they're sharing confidential information. This is private, private business, okay? This level of confidentiality, the sense of trust that we're going to keep it private, we're going to help each other. This becomes their personal space of confidentiality and trust for the participating spouse and that third party person. Okay, this becomes their privacy, and this is their emotional intimacy that is held separate from the marriage. And so while this third party relationship is developing, this pulls the spouses away from each other emotionally, and it also pulls the participating spouse just away from the whole concept of commitment in the marriage. And then this relationship then has become triangulated. So the other thing is that when the participating spouse is sharing personal information with this third party person about you and about your private relationship, not only is this a emotional boundary violation, but it's also a violation of your privacy, okay? We're giving private information to this person, most likely without your knowledge, or even if you do know, you may not really know the depths of what was being shared with them. And so this third party person who now has private information about you, they may truly not know you. They may not truly understand the nature of your marriage. And so as they give advice to their friend, okay, they may be giving the wrong advice, which ultimately causes more misunderstandings in your marriage. The other thing is that this third party person who has personal information about you, they may know you, and they may not like you, and they may have a personal interest in your loved one for themselves. And so they may then deliberately give wrong information to the participating spouse with the intent of pulling you apart. The participating spouse who views this person as their good friend, this is their trusted friend, you know, they're there for each other and help each other, may not realize that this is wrong advice and that they're even being manipulated. All right. So as this third-party relationship continues to become its own entity, it is separate from the marriage, and it then alienates the hurting spouse who is not part of this friendship, has not been invited into this friendship, and not welcomed. Okay, so the other concern about these third-party relationships is that they may continue to escalate. So we already know that 50% of emotional affairs go on to become sexual affairs. And then a percentage of them also continue to move forward with committed loving relationships and on into marriage, okay? So if you think about your own committed relationship that you're in right now, so you're married or you're living together or you're in this exclusively dating, loving relationship. When you think about the process of how you got there at this point, most likely it all started with your feelings on how you felt about this person. And so your feelings then started in your heart, where you're attracted to them, you like them, you're interested in them, you feel uplifted to be with them, and you want to know them more. And so your emotions and your feelings then was the very foundation of what got your committed relationship going in the first place, okay? And so from there, then these feelings went to your thoughts as you processed these feelings and then express them verbally and then through your actions. And then your relationship continued to grow. And so now you're married or you're living together or you're dating each other exclusively, okay? And so when these third-party relationships are also becoming emotionally based, this process may also continue in the same fashion if that participating spouse is not maintaining boundaries through his or her behavior, okay? All right, so the question then to think about is, do you consider this unfaithful? Your loved one is emotionally involved with someone else, presumably they're having sex, okay? So do you consider this unfaithful? And some people would say no. As long as they're not having sex with the person, what difference does it make? Okay. And so the difference is that number one, we're not talking about sex, but we're talking about the emotional aspect of your loving relationship. All right. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that the emotional aspect of your relationship is the foundation of how everything began. This is your emotions. This is the foundation and the glue that kind of holds you together. And so ask yourself then, or think about this question, that if you are not delivering emotional energy to the emotional aspect of your loving, committed relationship, and all of that emotional energy is going somewhere else, or part of it's going somewhere else, think to yourself on how your relationship is going to do. How well is it going to stay together, and how is it going to last? So I would like to get back to my example about my yard, that if I don't take care of my yard and nurture it and protect it, then my yard is going to become a weeded up, messed up, trashed up disaster, okay? And so the same applies then to your committed relationship, that if you do not provide the emotional energy that is needed to maintain that beautiful balance in that emotional space, then the relationship is most likely going to deteriorate as well, okay? And so the answer to the question here is this unfaithful? And the answer is that it is emotionally unfaithful or disloyal or emotionally negligent, or however you want to say it, all right? And I think this definition here pretty much sums all of that up. Betrayal may be viewed as any act or a life choice that does not prioritize your committed relationship and to put your loved one before all others. Okay, so this becomes the element of emotional betrayal by stepping outside of that emotional arena within the committed relationship and going somewhere else for those needs. And also the second thing I have listed here, entrusting another instead of you. And so what I mean by that is that when the participating spouse is normally sharing him or herself, with their loved one. They're maybe addressing and confronting issues about the marriage that need to be addressed, or perhaps they're just sharing issues about themselves that they want to talk about. And when this is happening like normal, which it should happen in the normal, happy, loving, committed relationship, that this person is actually demonstrating trust for the relationship. So either they trust their spouse to be there for them as their supportive, loving person, or they are trusting themselves to be able to express themselves, or they're just trusting the relationship in general that things will work out in this way and everything will be okay. But when that participating spouse takes all of that out of the marriage, they have pulled trust out of the marriage and are now sending it to someone else, all right? So this becomes emotional betrayal in that way, and obviously for having feelings for someone else, the disloyalty of violating your privacy, and also through the behaviors that are of concern, like secrecy and deleting text messages and blaming others inappropriately. And anytime there's prioritizing that third party person over and above you is disloyal to you and to the marriage. All right. Okay, so so this is back to the relationship triangle and why this is unfair for all three members of the relationship triangle. This is my third hypothesis. And it's unfair to the marriage because of the fracture of trust that it creates in that relationship. There's, the relationship of two, and one person takes on a third person. And so then this relationship becomes a triangulation, and it becomes an incomplete relationship for all three people. All right, so this is my third hypothesis. It is unfair for the participating spouse to do this to him or herself, because when they transfer emotional intimacy to someone else, they have automatically already distanced themselves emotionally from their loved one. They may not feel it, they may not notice it, but they're having feelings for someone else who is now kind of uplifting and fun and a joy to be with. And so they're having feelings for two different people, although they've not made any changes in their lives and may not have any inclinations to do so. But early on, they have already emotionally distanced themselves from their loved one. And so the participating spouse is then split, having feelings for two different people. And basically, because they're not really addressing the marriage, they're just kind of using that third party friend as a sounding board. They may not really be addressing issues about themselves to bring to the marriage. They're kind of passively sitting back and allowing two people in the world to fulfill their needs instead of them fulfilling their own needs or the needs of the marriage. And so it then becomes unfair to the participating spouse to do this to him or herself because they are cheating themselves from personal development to be a quality partner for anyone. The other thing is that there's a huge amount of denial, and this denial may be sincere clinical denial, where they're just not connecting the dots, they're just not getting it, or it may be deliberate denial, and you may have no way of knowing, okay? So because of all of this and this denial and having feelings for two different people, the participating spouse is cheating themselves from having a wholehearted loving experience with one person by partially having feelings for two different people. All right, so it's also unfair to do this to that third party person because basically they are being used by the participating spouse for their emotional needs whenever they feel the need for them. Okay, there's no obligation. They don't see them at night. They don't have to answer to them. They can just call them up whenever they feel the need for them at their own leisure. This third party person is a person too, and they have feelings also. And so they may interpret this interest as a signal that they really desire more. And so they may also then begin to feel an interest in a deeper relationship with that participating spouse, only to be disappointed if that participating spouse truly has no further interest in them other than just the casual close friendship that they have. So there can be a fine line there balancing that relationship that can create a lot of misunderstandings for that friendship. The other thing is that this third party person, if they are interested in more than just a friendship, they may be on hold waiting and wishing and desiring for something to happen. And so this ultimately puts them on hold from pursuing someone else who could love them wholeheartedly instead of part-time when that participating spouse feels the need for them. And so ultimately then they are also being cheated from a wholehearted loving experience. Okay, so the spouse left hurting is left hurting for obvious reasons. The fear of losing your loved one's love, the betrayal of trust, and the emotional betrayal of having feelings for someone else. And so that's a huge emotional injury. And then if the participating spouse had followed up with comments of you're jealous, or this is your issue, or you have problems, then their concerns become rejected and disregarded. And so this becomes then another level of emotional injury to that member of the relationship triangle. The other thing is that when the participating spouse is not truly revealing themselves to their loved one, they're kind of sharing some of these more themselves with this third-party friend. The spouse left hurting may truly, sincerely have no idea what their loved one's needs are that are not being communicated to them. They don't know what really needs to be addressed within the marriage since it's not being brought to the table there. And so they may truly be disadvantaged to nurture their loved one in a helpful, loving way and or the marriage. And so because of all of this, the hurting spouse is also being cheated from receiving a wholehearted loving experience from their loved one because their loved one is pouring energy into someone else. And so all three members of the relationship triangle then end up with an incomplete relationship. All right. Okay, so now we're going to get into the relationship model. So we've talked a lot about that third-party relationship and everything. You now know what not to do, and you now know what not to accept from your partner. So the relationship model is based on the understanding of putting your committed relationship first. And so first, you want to have this discussion on what does it mean to put your relationship first. And so obviously that's going to vary from one relationship to the next, depending on your lifestyle and your family and your career and things like that. I like to recommend what I call the relationship notebook. And this is just a nice private notebook for you and your loved one that you keep readily available, but private just for you too. And that if you have very busy work schedules, that a thought comes to your mind, you can jot it down, and then your loved one sees that later, like when you're gone to work, maybe a sentimental, flattering comment. And this helps to maintain that emotional intimacy in the marriage if you happen to be very busy with your schedules. The other thing about the relationship notebook is that sometimes it's a good idea to just jot down together, like conversations that you had about issues that are very important, maybe put a date on there, so that like, many months later, if there's a misunderstanding, you can go back to your notebook and say, hey, we just talked about this like 3 months ago, and this is what we decided on. And, did you forget? All right, so here's the reminder. Also, and these can be issues of important discussions to put in your notebook. If there's something really important that you want to talk about and you don't know when you're going to see each other because of busy schedules and things, it's a nice idea to write down your concern in the notebook, and that gives your loved one time to read it and time to think about it so that when they come to talk to you, they can give you a good quality answer instead of being caught off guard. Okay. All right. So I like to recommend what I call the powwow night. So instead of date night where you go out to dinner and come home and have romance, that you can have your powwow night. And this is designed for quality discussion between you and your loved one, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, or whatever your schedule is. And so this is designated time that you will have personal conversations with each other about each other. And it's not all doom and gloom, but if you have something very beautiful that you really appreciated about your loved one, this is a good time to share that very directly and express why you appreciated it so much. But also, if there are issues that are very sensitive topics, this is a good opportunity to agree to sit down and talk about this topic very intelligently and respectfully. Powwow night is not an invitation to the boxing arena. This is not yelling and screaming. This is like quality conversation on sensitive topics. All right. So as we know, boundaries are based on your values. Okay. So it's good to make a list of what your core values are. and they may vary from one person to the next. So this is my list of core values. I like to focus on accountability. And I think it's good for people to talk about accountability because those interpretations of that can vary. So naturally, it's about being responsible for your actions, but it's also a lot more than that, where you can be aware of how your behaviors affect others, what kind of message is your behavior conveying, even if you think the behavior is harmless. It may be causing some misunderstandings with other people. The other thing about accountability is that it's more than just that as well, but it's also being accountable to yourself, to know yourself well, to be aware of your feelings and your thoughts so that you can be in control of them and in touch with them to manage them appropriately in your behaviors, okay? All right, so when you gain your list of core values and you apply the right action that is appropriate to that, you then gain the end goal of trust. And so that emotional sacred space now becomes your sacred trusting space within the relationship and inside that emotional boundary. So in my book, I have a long list of do's and don'ts, and I have so much more detail there. But so on numbers 2, 3, and 4, this is basically about when you're in a committed relationship and how do you manage these other outside friends. So if you have been single in the past and you're hanging out with this single girl or the single guy, that when you enter your marriage or your committed relationship, your lifestyle has changed, all right? So you now have a responsibility to acknowledge that you're in a committed relationship. And so these single friends that you have been so used to hanging out with, you know, you might need to let them know, hey, I'm in a committed relationship now. I'm not quite readily available to hang out with you. You know, I like you, you're my friend, and how about maybe you can become friends with us as well? So this needs to be made clear to those single friends who maybe are not acknowledging that you're in a committed relationship. Number 5 is that if you're married and this third-party relationship comes about and becomes disruptive, it's important for the marital committed relationship couple to sit down and make an agreement of what you feel are respectful, healthy boundaries that are comfortable for both of you. And also it's important for that participating spouse to be sure to uphold these boundaries. It's also imperative to inform that third-party person exactly what the changes are, and that gives them an opportunity to be knowledgeable and to be respectful to both of you as a couple instead of a single, okay? All right. Okay, number 7, this is a big one. Create closest friends with people that do not threaten your spouse emotionally, romantically, or sexually per your lifestyle. And this one actually kind of makes me laugh, all right? So if you have this relationship that has developed and it's caused a lot of misunderstandings in your marriage and it's just becoming very frustrating, keep in mind that there are 7.8 billion other people in the world with whom you can be close friends and best friends with, that they like you and you like them and they like your loved one and everybody gets along and has a healthy, beautiful, respectful, healthy friendship, okay? So that's 7.8 billion opportunities to make some changes as opposed to hanging on to that one that is causing you so many problems. So just something to think about. Always keep your marriage as the foundation for communication and be respectful with these conversations with that third party person and don't share personal problems with them. Number 9 is professional engagements and lunches and dinners should be in groups and not alone if possible. Sometimes it's not possible because of the business, but if it's possible, it is kind of a good idea. I just learned this week that our former Vice President Pence actually would exercise this in his business meetings. He would not be alone with a woman. Another thing you can do is keep the office door open and things like that. So these are just things to think about. Let's see, if your loved one is uncomfortable with that third party friend, and obviously traveling out of town with them would be very awkward. So it's best to go in groups or go alone or take your spouse with you if you can. Number 12 is a big one also, to always speak honorably about your loved one and always hold their honor. So if someone is flirting with you or they're romantically interested in you, This sends such a loud message to them that you are faithful and loyal to your loved one, and that they're in your mind and in your heart and in your thoughts at all times. It's a polite way of letting them know that their flirting and their interest is not acceptable. All right. So if this third party person starts to share personal issues with you, just redirect them to their appropriate place. You're not their therapist, and they're not your therapist either. Number 14 is a big one also, to be upfront with your spouse in advance if you know if this third party person is going to be at an event. And this gives the marital couple an opportunity to talk about this ahead of time, make clear some of the understandings that may not be readily visible, or maybe even some decisions to make some changes if necessary. If the participating spouse waits till 30 seconds before they leave, that does not give the couple opportunity to work on this together. Number 16 is also a big one here, to reflect and to be honest with yourself. And this gets back to accountability to yourself. And this is a good opportunity to just examine yourself personally and ask yourself a lot of questions. What does my behavior say about me? What is my need for this third party friend that I insist on hanging on when it's messing up my marriage and my loved one? What does all of this say about me? And so this can be a very learning opportunity for that participating spouse. This is actually the hard part for all of us, to look at ourselves and make changes when necessary. And then number 18, if you are having feelings for someone else and you know this, then you might want to share that with your spouse, and you two could work on that together or talk to a therapist. But most definitely you would not share that with that third party person, because that's just an advertisement that you're interested in a relationship with them. So number 19, if this emotional affair has already occurred, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of your marriage, but hopefully you can talk about it, perhaps find forgiveness and apologize and work things through if you can. There's always a possibility, but there's issues of trust that would need to be remedied, and obviously change would have to occur. The basic bottom line here is to put your marriage and your loved one first. And then last but not least, that if you are ever uncertain about a situation that you think might make your loved one uncomfortable, then just ask. And this simple gesture sends such a loud message about you, that you care about the relationship that you share, and that you are becoming more aware of the concept of boundaries if you have not been aware of them in the past. All right, so in conclusion, the boundaries prevent a lot of misunderstandings for your marital, committed, loving relationship. They help to maintain good quality communication and hold your relationship together, and also provide a sense of protection to avoid these outside unhealthy influences. I think the topic of emotional affairs would be a great qualitative study. And then just the whole topic of boundaries in general is really fascinating, that there's just so many ways that you can start seeing boundaries in your life, left and right, whether it's personal or professional. My manuscript has not officially been published at this time. I am looking for a publisher, and I think that knowledge is power, so that the more people become aware of this topic, hopefully can prevent misunderstandings from occurring, or people who are dealing with this issue can hopefully work through this and get their relationship back together. So when my book does become published, I guarantee that this is should be required reading material for every couple that's getting premarital counseling, or for counselors and clients who are working on this issue, that they're already having the problem. I think my book would be a great required reading for them. Also a great adjunct to college classes with individuals who are learning to become therapists, and then for the general public at large. All right, so there are many theories and many philosophies on how to have a happy marriage and a happy relationship, and the healthy boundaries relationship model is just one avenue to open that discussion. And so how you manage your boundaries is a private discussion between you and your loved one, and but basically the focus is to put your relationship first. All right, so this is the conclusion of my presentation, and this is my contact information if someone would like to contact me for questions. And now I'm ready to open this discussion if there are any questions now.
Okay, very good. So anyone who is on the meeting right now in the session can either raise their hand or start in the chat box. If you'd like to ask your question, just raise your hand. Or you can unmute your mic, either way, or you can type in the chat box any questions you may have for Jennifer. Okay, we do have a chat. It was just a comment, and just nice job, Jennifer. So folks enjoyed that presentation. While maybe folks are thinking of some questions and getting their thoughts together, I'll share some of my observations, Jennifer. First of all, thank you so much. What a wonderful delivery of very complicated, concepts that I believe sadly can almost innocently take place in our relationships without us even noticing it. And then sometimes it's already got a foothold, and now the damage is sort of done, and I was wondering a little bit, how much do you think social media sort of contributes more easily to this development of an emotional affair with a third party individual that kind of begins digital and then can eventually lead to other areas of mistrust and so forth? What is your feeling on that?
I think that's a fabulous question. And I think that with new technology, it just makes these sidekick relationships so much easier to participate in. 50 years ago, the only thing we had was the telephone. Maybe just one phone in your house. So, but now there's so many other avenues for communicating and being in touch with this third party person when your spouse doesn't know. And so just with video chatting like this right here, or cell phones and texting and emails, I mean, it's wide open because of modern technology.
Yep. Okay, we do have a couple questions here, and this question is from, let me scroll down a little farther. This is from Patricia McAfee, and it is, did you see a difference in how people feel about this issue in regard to age brackets or generations? It sounds like she's saying, do newer generations maybe are a little more tolerant of some of these things that older generations would have said, hey, this is not at all acceptable? I don't know.
I did find an article that addressed that, and I believe it was mostly the younger generation, like say under 40 and below, are most likely to engage in this. I did read that, yes. The good question.
Excellent presentation. This is definitely an area of need for additional research and knowledge, was Dr. Brim's comment. And then, of course, multiple people saying, great job, excellent presentation, excellent thesis on emotional affairs. You need to get published. That's what Robbie's saying. So very good. If anyone else is not, have any questions or anything, I'll just sort of maybe summarize and share, if I can, Jennifer, some of my notes in order to tie some ends on things, and then maybe answer some of my additional questions as well. But I thought it was really neat how you gave the analogy of a garden, that you have to give care to the garden. It just doesn't take care of itself, and that the garden has to have a boundary, has to have a fence, and that boundary is to protect what's in our garden. And our garden is our relationship. And the fence, the boundaries are our conversations with our loved ones about where are we saying are the acceptable or unacceptable thresholds of behavior in terms of our emotional relationship, physical, everything else that comes along with being committed to someone. So I thought that was a really neat analogy.
Thank you.
When these friendships sort of become imbalanced, you called it. And again, we won't always have to run around and be suspicious of friends,
Right.
That imbalance starts being more of those kinds of behaviors that you listed. And that's when it kind of turns into that emotional affair, which is having feelings for someone else that are pulling me away from the person I'm supposed to be having feelings for. And those feelings, in 50% or so of the cases, eventually lead to physical attraction.
Correct.
I thought you really made it clear, because it makes total common sense when you said, well, think about how you fell in love with that person. Think about how you were attracted to them and they were attracted to you. It all started with only the emotional. And now this friend has got the same, beginning step, the emotional, that they can leave the path the same way that person you're committed to, followed that path. And so I thought that was also interesting. And just the most central word that obviously came out of this entire presentation was boundaries.
Correct.
And you labeled your book Healthy Boundaries, your model Healthy Boundaries. And your model was commonsensical in some ways, that anybody can apply it if they just are intentional. That was the other word about the model, was because it makes so much common sense, that it's not difficult for everyone to at least try it. And that was, you have to put your relationship first. We always know that should be rule number one, but get a notebook and reflect in that notebook about the relationship. Have a relationship sort of a centered event that occurs, so that conversation can, you call it the powwow, can evolve, around issues before they become issues, and you can continue to reinforce the fence and put new nails in it, and pick some weeds out of the garden every once in a while in order to keep things healthy. And that you said to make sure we list core values, and sometimes that's the area that might not always get discussed. And we don't always think about your vows, your marriage vows. They're kind of very generic, they're not as defined as something as specific as, I want to tell you what my values are.
Correct.
So forth. So those were some of my learnings. I liked your list of 20 do's and don'ts. And again, am I doing more of this and that? And I think it happens so innocently. I don't believe any of these people in this relationship triangle ever start off thinking, I want to destroy this relationship, or I want to now get out of my relationship and in with this other person. I don't think it starts that way. I just think it develops that way through those kinds of behaviors.
Right. And that's correct.
And then I guess the last sort of aha, or yes, that is sort of what can contribute, is that we often make decisions based on emotions and not logic. And then that's what sucks us into it. I guess I do have one of those pondering questions that you said men and women respond to this topic differently, and so in a heterosexual relationship, they're going to view it differently. What about same-sex couples? If both are female, do they now see more similarly as opposed to a male and female? Again, I don't know. There may not be research out there, and that might not have been part of your population in your sample, but it's something good to think about,
Well, I did not find any information that was specific for alternative lifestyles. Most everything that I read was based on the heterosexual lifestyle. And as I had done a lot of research, it appeared to be a lot of really limited information. Most of the articles that I found at the time were pretty old articles from like 2014 or 2009. And that was a little bit discouraging, because I thought, well, maybe there's something new. But the information is kind of limited, and I think that this is a uncharted territory for further research and to answer some of those questions with different groups that apply to having these emotional affairs, and the numbers and statistics on all of that.
Well, guess what's going to happen soon, Jennifer? All of that old research that you said that just stopped and there's nothing new on it, it's all going to change when you publish your book.
It's all coming back.
Putting all the new stuff back out there and getting people talking about this. It is an important topic. I'm wondering to what degree pandemic has caused some of this, because now we're sometimes stuck inside of a house with someone who we used to like, and now overexposure to them makes us like them less. And we may, have more spats and et cetera. And therefore we have the opportunity to reach out to someone else to help us get out of this box that we've been stuck in for a year called our homes.
Yeah.
And so, but again, I think it all goes back to that one word, regardless of where we're stuck and with whoever we're stuck with, the key word is boundaries. Just talk about the boundaries, know where the fence is. And when people cross those boundaries, then you have the conversation about what side of the fence you want to be on. You want to be in the garden, or you want to go outside the garden, but make a decision.
Exactly. That's correct.
Alrighty. Thank you, Jennifer. Everybody else who attended, thank you. So many names from this morning's session. So I appreciate y'all showing up and supporting each other. Don't forget, there's another full day of presentations tomorrow. And tomorrow's topic will actually be human trafficking and some solutions to that have been explored by some of our faculty and students even, in terms of what it was in North America, and then also some efforts down in South America. So everyone enjoy the rest of your day. I will post a recording on our website soon, and we look forward to seeing you in the rest of the colloquium. Take care.
All right. Thank you.